I'm an Alaskan Bush Pilot. I was sent to rescue a park ranger for the dark night tales. I've been flying as a bush pilot in Alaska for the last 5 years or so. It's a pretty good job for the right sort of person. It goes without saying that you need to be a pretty handy pilot, specifically of small and light aircraft. But beyond that, it also requires a special sort of personality. Folks who thrive on social interaction and the safe comfort of civilization need not apply. Being self-sufficient and mechanically inclined are pretty much prerequisites for those who want to stay on the side of the grave. And I'd say it is pretty important which you have a degree head and will be inclined to panic in disturbing situations. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm no longer talking about thrill seekers or those who do not have a healthy recognize for loss of life. Those folks do not generally tend to last too lengthy in this enterprise. They both come to be as every other in the lengthy listing of lacking planes that gains new entries each while in any other case they fast study that their employers aren't willing to danger their expensive equipment and load with someone that is not going to take each viable precaution to ensure the safe go-back of stated plane. I'm just pronouncing that you have a good way to set your fears aside while you're within the thick of it. If something goes incorrect, you need a clear head. You can constantly puke or skip out after you're competently on the ground again. I've had my share of cold sweats standing on a frozen runway after a near brush with the afterlife. Me? I'm a transplant from South Florida, where I spent plenty of my time doing puddle bounce charters in a small dual-engine Beechcraft. Interesting, positive. However, coping with human beings has in no way been my strong match. I'm no longer exactly the sociable kind, even much less so after I'm looking to fly. When you've got 4 passengers sitting a pair feet in the back of you and awaiting you to play tour guide on their 2-hour flight throughout the Everglades, it gets antique quite short. Or at the least it did for me. I bet it really works for a few human beings. Anyway, a flying friend of mine that I hadn't talked to in years, known as Mia, up suddenly one day with a lead on an open seat on the Bush Constitution Company he'd been operating without of Fairbanks. One of the pilots had determined that the cruel Alaskan winters and isolation had been greater than his nerves ought to take. So he gave his be aware, packed his luggage, and returned south. Truth be instructed, I had never clearly considered looking for a gig in Alaska. I usually had the affect that maximum of the bush pilots running there have been flying STOL. This is a short takeoff and landing inside the back country, seeing that they were old sufficient to walk. But Nick confided me that there were plenty of respected pilots up there who had originated from the decrease 48. When he floated the income numbers in my course, I did not take too long to considering it before I made my selection. And weeks later, I located my self-status within the places of work of my new business enterprise. That turned into a while again. And even though it took a chunk to turn out to be conversant in the type of bush flying that this region needs, I settled in pretty quick and changed into, soon assigned to my permanent journey, a de Havilland DHC-2 Beaver. Maggie, after a yellow lab I had as a kid. Man, what a splendor she is. Solar yellow with black piping and looking simply as pristine as whilst she rolled off the assembly line in 1967. The Beaver might be the quality bush plane to ever grace the skies. And I'm pretty sure that Maggie stored my ass from a silly mistake on more than one occasion. Anyway, I'm getting astray. So on the time this tale passed off, I'd been flying for Viking Bush charters for probably 12 months or so. I'd simply returned from losing components off to a ranger station up close to Denali once I were given a name over the radio from my dispatcher. I become inside the hangar on the time, getting a warm cup of espresso, even as the mechanic was refitting Maggie together with her Tundra tires, swapping out the floats I'd wanted for the supply drop-off earlier. The large, almost cartoonish tires had been perfect for most of the areas I tended to fly into, and made for a soft, if energetic, touchdown. I became searching ahead to getting lower back to my trailer and enjoyable, maybe watching a film before snoozing off. But the crackle from my manor advised me that my interesting plans for the night might not play out. "Go for Hooper," I replied, taking a sip of the steaming espresso. The voice of Buck Jacobs replied through the mild static. "Hey, Hoop, what's your reputation?" "Hey, Mike is running on Maggie's gear, and I was on the brink of head domestic for the nighttime." "What's up?" There became a second's pause earlier than Buck spoke back. "Sorry, Hoop. However, I want you to do a turnaround. We simply got a call from a ranger station up close to Birch Creek. Were given someone up there that had a run-in with a brown undergo and is quite banged up." I cursed below my breath. However, there wasn't any real venom in it. I learned a while ago that, up here, every person helps when it is needed. You never recognize when it'll be you on the other side of that call. Can't they fly him out themselves? I requested, but I become already on foot round my plane to where Mike Nichols changed into running. No can do, Hoop. They have a Cessna 206. However, it's currently out as part of a few seek and rescue operation, and we are the closest telephone name. I'd ship Jackie. However, she's not again from her run-up to Minto yet. He spoke back. "Okay, Buck. No issues. I'll assist Mike, get Maggie refit and prepped. I ought to be wheels up in an hour or so," I said. "Thanks, Hoop. I'll have the details on your arms in 15. Dispatch out." And there went my relaxing nighttime. True to my prediction, I changed into taxiing down the employer's personal runway an hour later. The vibration from the large radial engine developing a mild thrumming that stuffed the interior. It became just before 3 p.m. once I changed into airborne, and being that it was late February, I knew I had simply over 2 hours before sunset. So lengthy as the whole thing went smoothly, that need to were sufficient time to attain the ranger station, load up the passenger, and get lower back to Fairbanks earlier than darkish. The climate become pretty desirable once I left. It become pushing +10 levels. And although the reviews were calling for snow that night, the sky became clean as I rose above the trees and grew to become northeast toward the ranger station. Everything was going smoothly for the primary half hour. Before those distant storm clouds, I'd been looking at the horizon all of sudden regarded to have a keen interest in me and headed my way lots faster than I could have liked. To make topics worse, I'd started out to notice a diffused bumping sensation intermittently coming from the engine. I wasn't positive if I became beginning to lose one of the 9 cylinders, or if it became something else. However, it became definitely something I was maintaining my eye on. If I'd been on an ordinary deliver run, I'd have turned round and headed again to Fairbanks, right then and there to get it looked at. But I changed into acutely aware that all people who'd had a tangle with a grizzly become possibly in a horrific way. My flight out to the Birch Creek Ranger Station may very well suggest the distinction between life and dying for this unfortunate soul. After some other 15 minutes, I knew that I wasn't going to make it to the ranger station. The hurricane clouds that have been drawing close had now overtaken me and blanketed the afternoon sky in a thick blanket of gray-black ugliness. I should see the periodic flashes of lightning within them, and the air had grown turbulent. To make matters worse, the engine omit that I'd been feeling had become more common and intense, and I was certain that I now had a couple of cylinders that had been beginning to fail. I grabbed the VHF and radioed returned to dispatch. Viking ground, Viking 320 Foxtrot. Buck's voice crackled via a second later. Dia Javelin 320, Foxtrot, Viking ground. Greetings, Yahoo. Buck, I've run into a few nasty weather right here, and I've started out to pick up a few engine issues. I'm afraid I'm going to should abort and head home. Please endorse Birch Creek Ranger Station of my state of affairs. Buck did not argue. He knew I wouldn't abort a pickup like this for a few snow flurries. Roger that, Hoop. Looking on the weather radar, suggest you're making your heading 185 ranges and drop to 900 to avoid the worst, the wind shear. Roger that. Viking 320 Foxtrot out. I stated, banking the aircraft to the proper and beginning my go back to the airfield. The hurricane front, which had overtaken me from my left, had also descended with its approach, bringing the clouds low and thick. I'd driven forward on the yoke, starting my descent to Buck's recommendation and hoping that there were not any errant mountains in my way. 5 mins later, I turned into combating with the wind for control of Maggie, and turned into now almost in a whiteout situation, relying almost exclusively on my gadgets for navigation. The turbulence changed into getting extreme, tossing the workhorse bush plane around like a kite in a gale. More than once the groaning of the wing struts made me surprise if the storm changed into pushing Maggie past her consolation area and checking out the boundaries of her airframe. I descended a piece more, dropping to 500 feet, aware that during those low visibility situations I changed into pushing my good fortune with the terrain. The air was a bit cleanser down here, even though the visibility a little better. However, I became still being thrown around, and I knew I'd needed to climb once more pretty soon on the way to clean the ridgeline. I knew turned into not too a long way beforehand of me. An unnerving metal popping noise above my head drew my attention momentarily, and in that second, I made the selection that I needed to discover a place to set her down and wait out the hurricane as satisfactory I should. The bushes underneath me have been turning into scene now at this altitude, their peaks piercing the low cloud cowl and heavy snowfall like ghostly claws, achieving up from the depths of a few abysmal grave to tug me down. The largest problem I now confronted became locating a suitable place to land safely. I knew that the winds had pushed me off course, and I wasn't as acquainted with this location as most others I hung out flying over. I wasn't aware about any touchdown strips close by, and was simply praying to find a large enough clearing to accommodate her. Another engine leave out. Worse this time. This time the strained drone of the radial cut out completely for a half of 2D before resuming, and for the first time seeing that I'd come to Alaska, I realized that there was a totally real opportunity that I may not make it home. If the engine died, absolutely, in what changed into now a strong tailwind, my airspeed could fast drop till one of my wings stalled. When that occurred, the beaver could wing over, and I'd tumble to the floor in an unrecoverable demise spiral. It might be months or years before my wreckage became determined out here, within the wilderness. I'd taken into consideration trying to turn into the wind to keep as tons airspeed as feasible in that occasion. However, it become gusting horrific sufficient that I was afraid to try it, especially with a limping engine. I was getting ready to radio dispatch and allow Buck know of my worsening state of affairs when the thick clouds parted beforehand of me briefly. In that immediate, idea I'd won the most crucial lottery of my lifestyles. Directly ahead of me, a quarter of a mile out, turned into the unmistakable rectangular form of a small airstrip. It changed into blanketed in snow that I was hoping wasn't too deep. However, it became my salvation, a lifeline that I wouldn't dare refuse. I fast adjusted my approach and set my flaps as I made for it. Another sturdy gust fought me, looking to throw me out of alignment with the slim clearing, but I fought lower back with throttle and rudder, as great I should, as I watched the altimeter regularly wind down like an analog clock going backwards in time. I reached for the radio headset to endorse buck of my scenario and estimate region, but the subsequent gust nearly tore the yoke out of my left hand, and I snapped immediately back to a white-knuckled, exceeded grip. My altitude dropped to 200 feet. I become going too speedy, I knew. At this velocity, I'd either overshoot the strip altogether and slam into the dense tree line, or hit the floor so difficult that I'd shear off my tools and spoil my lower back within the technique. I could not gradual her down any in addition, even though, or I would threat dropping below stall velocity in the robust tailwind, and that might imply a quick ride to the frozen floor. 100 foot. Maggie's wings dipped beneath the tree line now as I entered the lengthy and slim swath of the touchdown strip, the tall cedars and spruces towering around me forebodingly. The tailwind dropped, obscured by using the incredible barrier of timber at the back of me, and I took a breath to thank some thing powers that be for this sudden little bit of desirable fortune, 50 toes. With the flap set to complete, I bled off airspeed quickly, and my reflexes took over, transitioning from my near-ballast flight to a more controlled approach. One the Beaver was a lot more ideal, too. 10 feet. I pulled lower back at the yoke and momentarily throttled up as my equipment kissed the top of the snow, flaring the Bush aircraft and setting down a bit tougher than I might have favored, the jarring of the effect happily cushioned by the Tundra tires. I rolled out for every other 20 feet or so before Maggie came to a halt within the knee-deep snow, thankful that I hadn't nosed over. I killed the engine and rested my brow at the yoke, trying to get my heart rate under manipulate. I didn't think the shaking of my arms had anything to do with the temperature. The daytime became fading, however changed into nevertheless mild, sufficient to permit me a great view of my environment through Maggie's windows. I become inside the center of what I guessed became the landing strip, for the reason that bushes coated on both facet seemed to be about the same distance from me. Those trees had been even extra enforcing down here on the floor. They rose like towering walls on both sides, and the woodlands past held deep shadows that had been only accentuated by the heavy snowstorm that continued too difficult to understand my vision. I reached for the radio and keyed the mic, hailing dispatch. I did not have a great deal religion that the VHF would be able to penetrate the timber and the mountain ridge that lay between me and Buck. However, it was really worth a shot. After an extended second of hissing static, I attempted once more, however with the same consequences. It became doubtful that I'd be able to get a signal through until the typhoon handed, or even then I did not suppose it possibly, except I should get Maggie airborne once more. With simplest a second's deliberation and a resigned sigh, I retrieved the emergency locator beacon from my jacket pocket and activated it. The unit might broadcast a distress sign, along with my place, to the monitoring service. I knew it would be an afternoon as a minimum earlier than assist arrived, but the sooner I sent the decision, the earlier that they'd be able to come get me. I took some other appearance out through the fuselage windows. If there was a touchdown strip, that intended an opportunity that a person changed into nearby. I didn't think there has been a ranger station out here, but there have been sufficient searching cabins and homesteads that there was a decent threat I could discover shelter. The indoors of the plane become still warm, but I knew that wouldn't closing very long in this climate, mainly with night drawing close. I unbuckled myself and climbed back through the seats into the cargo vicinity, wherein I pulled on my heavy coat and shouldered my emergency percent. Grabbing my rifle from its rack in the back of the pilot's seat, I unlatched and swung open the cargo door. A blast of Arctic wind hit me within the face, and I squinted my eyes against it, quick pulling my goggles on and my hood up before losing to the snow-blanketed runway. I pulled the cargo door closed and trudged across the rear of the aircraft, status within the furrows left via Maggie's wheels, and turning in a slow circle as I attempted to figure any indication of human presence. Despite the howling wind that pulled at my coat and hood, I stuck the unmistakable fragrance of timber smoke and breathed a small sigh of relief. At least I knew I wasn't by myself out here. As I scanned my surroundings, my eyes alighted on what gave the look of a small software shed at the western fringe of the clearing, and I moved with as tons pace, because the deep snow would permit in its course. To the left of it I spied a waist-high railing marking a walkway that led into the shadowed tree line, and quickened my tempo. I accompanied the path, now feeling what had been likely wood planks below my boots. Once in the bushes, the brutal wind of the hurricane lessened, and the snow drifted down from the cover in sluggish, dancing swirls before settling on the ground with a muted hiss that sounded like the wooded area around me changed into quietly exhaling. Between the dim light of the coming dusk and the snowstorm, I couldn't see an awful lot beyond the timber nearest me, and I depended on the handrail to guide my tour. It turned into another few minutes of plodding through the snow-included walkway earlier than I subsequently saw the constructing. At first I conceived it was a hunting cabin, solitary amidst the countless sea of trees. As I drew closer, though, I may want to see it become tons large than I first thought, low and extensive, and of present-day production. Some kind of sign stood between wood uprights simply off the direction, its face blanketed in snow and ice. I paused to sweep it clear, really amazed to peer the blue historical past, an emblem of the Alaskan Division of Agriculture. White lettering beneath indicated that this turned into the White River Basin Agricultural Research Center. I'd in no way heard of the ADOA having desolate tract studies centers. However, I meant it wasn't too some distance fetched. Regardless, this turned into even better information than I'd expected. This intended that I wasn't drawing close a few remoted searching camp, however, as a substitute a central authority put up, and that meant my possibilities of survival and rescue had simply multiplied appreciably. I gave a hoot of pleasure and patted the sign as though it had been an antique friend who had just introduced a few right news, and jogged the final handful of yards to the front door of the building. Just as I approached, however, the door swung open, spilling yellow mild throughout the white snow. A guy stepped out from the doorway and shouldered a shotgun, leveling it proper at my head, his eyes huge and wild as they stared down the barrel at me. "Stop proper there," he shouted at me, his phrases coming in angry puffs of steam within the frigid air. "Don't come any nearer. Whoa, maintain on a minute, Chief." "Just wait," I spoke back, my palms going up reflexively. "I'm no longer here to motive any hassle." He motioned with the shotgun. "Drop the rifle, nice and slow. I'm caution you. I might not hesitate to blow you in half of if you make any sudden actions." Holding my unfastened hand up to show I was no risk, I bent slowly and placed the rifle on the floor earlier, then growing again. "What's going on? Who are you? What are you doing right here?" he demanded. I may want to see the muzzle of the shotgun, trembling and worried that he may grow to be shooting me via mistake, simply due to nerves. He changed into sporting what gave the impression of a Central Authority-issued coat with an embroidered patch on the shoulder, and had a week's growth of beard. "Easy, boss," I stated, seeking to hold my voice level and calm. "My call's Hooper. I'm a pilot for Viking Bush Charters out of Fairbanks. My aircraft changed into pressured down inside the hurricane, and I turned into fortunate to find your landing strip before she ended up inside the trees. I changed into, beginning to surprise if lucky changed into the proper word anymore." He checked out me an extended minute, his eyes scanning me over, then motioned at me again with the shotgun. "Take off your goggles. Let me see your eyes," he said. That stuck me off protect, but I nodded and slowly moved my palms to remove the tinted goggles, careful no longer to make any surprising actions. He leaned in the direction of me, eyes locked difficult on mine, searchingly. Then, seemingly happy, he suddenly lowered his gun and nodded, as if reassuring himself. He jerked his head, returned closer to the doorway, and his whole demeanor changed. "Well, Hooper, come on interior. Bring your rifle. It's too damn cold out here." With that, he grew to become and walked lower back inner, resting the shotgun against the indoors wall subsequent to the door as he did so. Now even greater careworn than before, I reached down and collected my rifle from the snowy floor, my gaze by no means leaving the person. As inconspicuously as I could, I worked the lever, chambering a cartridge, and accompanied him in. It changed into such a bizarre interplay. I wanted to make sure he wouldn't marvel me again if he decided to change his thoughts. When I entered the constructing and closed the door in the back of me, I located myself in what gave the look of a wooden-paneled tourist's room, with a couch on one wall and a blazing hearth fronted by more than one chairs on the opposite. The man had moved over to a small desk close to the fireplace, pouring a glass of whiskey from a 1-2 empty bottle, and now reputedly, absolutely disinterested in my presence. I frowned and glanced across the room. Aside from the sparse fixtures, there has been a closed door across from the only I had entered through, labeled with a limited get right of entry to signal. The man took a long drink from his glass and grew to become returned to me, holding the whiskey bottle out to me in offering. I just shook my head. "Sorry about that," he said, gesturing vaguely to the door at the back of me. "Can't be too cautious. I'm Morgan Tate, Field Studies." I eyed him cautiously. "Okay, Morgan Tate. You are making a habit of welcoming visitors with a shotgun?" I nevertheless wasn't positive who I changed into coping with here, however something turned into absolutely off. He just grinned at some private shaggy dog story that he on my own shared, after which ducked his head in a nod, taking every other swallow of whiskey. Lately? Yeah, or at least I could if I were given any sight visitors. He pointed at me along with his tumbler and sat closely in the chair. I turned into beginning to get the influence that this wasn't the primary drink of the day for Mr. Morgan Tate. "You're the first residing man or woman I've seen in more than per week," he brought. "Are you the simplest one, right here?" I requested, searching around the room. There was a row of hooks at the wall beside the door, and I took note of numerous coats hung there. He smirked, something unreadable at the back of his eyes. "Now?" "Yeah." I failed to recognize what kind of recreation he became playing at. However, I became starting to lose my endurance. "Care to complicate it on that?" You're having sort of a rough day, and you're now not making it any less difficult." The dark-haired man finished off his drink and stood. "Sure. Why no longer? I think you are a part of this now," he said, transferring past me towards the limited get-entry to door. I accompanied him as he pushed the door open and proceeded along a slim, tiled hall, lit by harsh fluorescent lighting fixtures. It felt out of place, greater like I became walking through the halls of a health facility than an ADOA building inside the center of the bush. He regarded over his shoulder and took observe of my wonder. "Yeah, not pretty just like the ranger stations, is it?" he stated, stomping in the front of a heavy-looking door on the stop of the hall and keying in a brief code into the panel above the manage. I heard a gentle click, and he pushed it open, exposing a darkened room past. He entered, and the lighting fixtures flickered on as I followed. The room we now stood in turned into larger than the previous one, likely 30 feet throughout and smelling of antiseptic and chemical substances. Several rows of stainless steel tables were neatly arranged inside, all for diverse, unusual laboratory paraphernalia and equipment. In addition to those lab stations, there also appeared to be examination tables along the along-way wall, a few of which had white cloths masking unidentifiable shapes. I suppressed a shudder. It reminded me of a morgue, though the concealed gadgets were too small to be human, our bodies. "What is this vicinity?" I requested, my eyes taking it all in. Just like the sign out of doors says, "Hooper, this is the White River Basin Agricultural Research Center," he replied, leaning against one of the tables, set up to screen huge mammal natural world migrations with potential correlations to weather change. "Huh," I spoke back frivolously. "Sounds interesting." He grinned. No, it would not even to me, and I paintings here. Would you believe that every week ago, there had been 25 researchers living and running here? 25, Hooper. This area turned into hoppin', guy. An uncomfortable tingle ran down my spine, and I shifted the rifle in my hand, the weight of it reassuring as it hung via my side. If Tate noticed, he didn't point out it. "What occurred last week?" I requested carefully. When he turned lower back to me, the smirk turned into long gone from his face, and his eyes had widened. Whatever was in his mind now, he did not discover it fun anymore. "That's when they came, Hooper. They? The shadows, man. The shadows. They came from the storm. You take into account the typhoon, do not you?" The typhoon. I knew what he'd become speak me about, of path. However, I don't suppose every person round right here could overlook it any time quickly. It became little more than per week in the past, whilst the freak snowstorm came out of nowhere, unexpected and unexplained. What had commenced out as a cloudless and unseasonably warm morning ended up burying us in almost feet of snow by the time it turned into over. The sky had shifted from shiny and sunny to a bruised and irritated granite color in the span of an hour. Clouds rolling so low and heavy that it regarded like you can attain up and touch them. Our climate station in the discipline became clocking sustained wind speeds of 50 knots, with gusts up to 85, and we had been in a total whiteout situation for the subsequent 14 hours. We had been all trapped in the hangar, huddled around the kerosene jet warmers, listening to the wind as it tried to tear apart the heavy metal structure around us. By the time tomorrow came, it turned into simply long gone, replaced by using the clear blue skies of the preceding morning. Nobody had any right reason for it, but I'd heard multiple the old-timers who ran the device store whispering about it in the lower back. I could not make out tons of what they had been announcing. I failed to a lot care, if I'm being sincere, However, they sounded concerned. At the time, I idea it changed into a bit odd that the weather would unnerve them as a great deal because it appeared to. These men were both complete blood Inuit and as tough as nails. It become nearly comical to suppose they had be worried about a Marvel snowstorm. No. Now that I think again on it, it nearly seemed like they have been more concerned about something within the blizzard. I can't be sure due to the fact they saved switching inside and out of English. But this is the affect I were given anyway. The shadows, I requested, stressed. His hands drifted off into the distance for a moment, lost in his personal world. In the subsequent moment, he snapped them lower back to me eagerly, like he simply had an epiphany, and stated, "Yeah. Do you need to see one? Do I want to see a shadow? What the hell are you talking approximately, guy? You're now not making any experience." But he changed into already on the pass once more, strolling across the room to some other door. He beckoned me to comply with, entered his code, and pushed it open. Wordlessly, I followed, unease whispering in my ear. He led me along some other hallway, glancing over his shoulder periodically, like he turned into making sure I changed into still there. I caught one. The different researchers, they did not suppose it become possible, however I knew I ought to, he stated, and it nearly appeared like he become talking to himself greater than to me. He stopped at a door marked Or 2, pushed it open, and walked interior. I trailed at the back of him hesitantly, feeling fearful about this complete aspect. A gradual feeling of dread had been warming its manner via my subconscious, and I wasn't so positive I desired to follow this man a lot in addition. The entire state of affairs felt incorrect, and I turned into beginning to think that Mr. Morgan Tate was greater than just a little unhinged. Where have been the other researchers he'd cited? I'd question whether they ever existed in any respect, if now not for the dimensions of the place and the coats hanging via the door inside the reception place. The room I stepped into now turned into plenty smaller than the others and had the feel of some form of manipulate room. The wall to my left held slender lockers and a rack of coat hooks occupied by way of several white lab coats. To my proper became a console lined with video display units and keyboards, and above that, the whole higher portion of the wall appeared to be an observation window looking into a darkened room. On the alternative wall, changed into one of those airlock doorways which you see in isolation regions of hospitals.